writing second grade, and we are going to continue drafting our awesome personal narratives. I'm so excited for us to keep on writing our own stories. So let's take a look at our learning target for Wednesday. It says, I can draft the middle of my personal narrative using description. So on Monday, we drafted the start, the beginning of our personal narrative. We set up our story for the reader. Today, we're going to draft the next important part, which is the middle of the story. The middle of the story. And we're not just going to write anything. We're going to make sure we use description. Remember, we are working to show, not just tell, this story. The reader didn't experience that story, so you need to give as much information and as much description as you can to really paint that image in your reader's mind. So remember, we are drafting. Do we remember what it means to draft? It's the second step of our writing process. We've already done planning and we're in the drafting stage. What does it mean to draft? It means to try for the first time, to do the first version of it. We're not just going to write a story for one time and call it good. We're going to spend time making sure it's the best we can do. So in drafting, we're just writing it for the first time and we're trying out our sentences. So that's what we're going to do as well today. We started with the beginning on Monday, and now we have to go to the middle. This is the big chunk of our story. Most of the stuff that happens in the middle. And in the middle of our story, we tell the action in order. Remember, it's really important to go in order, to talk about exactly how the story happened, from the first thing to the last thing. This makes it easier for our reader to follow along. And it makes sure we accurately tell the story. So in the middle, we are going to tell the action in order. And like it said in our learning target, we are doing this with the help of description. Can you say this word with me? Description. One more time. Description. By describing, we are using what we call, of course, adjectives. With adjectives, we can describe so many things in our story. And those important things are what we heard in our story, what we smelled in our story, what we saw in our story, and most importantly, in a personal narrative, how this story is making us feel. How are the events that are happening to us making us feel? All of this can be described with the help of adjectives. We want to give as much information to make that little picture in our reader's head as clear as possible. So what you are going to need today is your resource, page 3. That was your story plan, your outline, and then the beginning draft of your personal narrative. So I wrote out my beginning on a piece of paper. This is my draft. And I'm going to use both of these today as I draft my middle. So make sure you have these because you will get to use them later. Okay, let's start learning how we can draft the middle of our personal narrative. So before I start writing the middle draft, I'm going to make sure I reread the beginning and remember what I wrote, because I'm just continuing the story, so I have to remember how it starts. So my personal narrative said, during my senior year of college, I took my driver's test in West Seattle. On this day, the sun was shining and the sky was blue. The instructor and I got into the tiny Prius, and we were ready to go. I was feeling very nervous. So that was the beginning of my personal narrative that I drafted on Monday. And I'm going to continue writing on the same piece of paper. or right now, it's going to be up on this whiteboard. As you can see, I have the last sentence in the beginning part right up top. Feeling very nervous. When I start writing my middle, I'm going to make sure to skip a line and start writing down here. I want to make sure to show there's a difference between the beginning and the middle of my personal narrative. So before I start, I'm going to make sure I skipped a line and I marked it so I know this is where I'm going to start drafting. And then I'm going to take a look at my story plan. I already have 2 sentences written in the middle of my story plan. They are, first, I drove and made a good left turn. Next, I made a mistake and drove with the parking brake on. So those are 2 important major events. And we're going to leave them as they are. We're not going to add any more events to this middle because if we're just listing a bunch of things in order, it's going to get pretty boring. So instead, to make our personal narrative more exciting, we're going to talk about these 2 events, just these 2 events, but in more detail, with more description, talking about all of our senses. So in the middle of the paragraph, you're still going to just stick with these 2 events, but you're going to describe more about them. So let me start. Okay, so I'm going to copy down what I first had. So it says, first, I drove and made a good left turn. I drove and made a good left turn. Okay, I'm thinking about what I was seeing, what I was hearing when I was making that left turn. I'm going to add more description. I noticed there were a lot of cars on the road. Okay, that is something I saw. I noticed there were a lot of cars on the road. And how was I feeling right now? This was the start of my test. I made a good left turn. Let's see. Right now, I was feeling both calm and nervous. So I'm explaining that I was feeling still nervous, like I was in the beginning, but I also was feeling a little bit calm, so it was going a little bit better. Okay, let me read what I just wrote. First, I drove and made a good left turn. I noticed there were a lot of cars on the road. Right now, I was feeling both calm and nervous. So I gave more description and more detail about this first event when I made a good left turn. So now, I'm going to move on to the second event I had on my outline, which was next, I made a mistake and drove with the parking brake on. So this is where there's a big change in my story. So let's write that sentence. So I'm going to say, next, I'm going to include this transition word. I made a mistake and drove with the parking brake on! Exclamation point. The next that I started my sentence with tells my reader that I'm moving on to a different event. Okay, so next I made a mistake and drove with the parking brake on. So what was happening at this moment? I want to give more detail. That I drove with the parking brake on because I was trying to parallel park. That's what I was doing before. Let's see, this happened I'm giving more background information to why I drove with the parking brake on. This happened because I was trying to park. And I'm sorry about my handwriting, but writing sideways makes it a little bit wonky. So lastly, I'm going to talk about how was I feeling when I did this. I remember my face got really red and I started sweating. That's how I was feeling, so I'm going to write that down. It's like my face got red, and I started sweating. Because it made me really, really nervous. Okay, Super Scholars, let's read that next part that I wrote for my middle. Next, I made a mistake and drove with the parking brake on. This happened because I was trying to park. My face got red and I started sweating. So I used a lot of description of telling my reader what it looked like around me, giving more information about what I was doing and how I was feeling. So let's quickly read back over my whole middle draft to make sure I wrote what I wanted to. So let's see. First, I drove and made a good left turn. I noticed there were a lot of cars on the road. Right now, I was feeling both calm and nervous. Next, I made a mistake and drove with the parking brake on. This happened because I was trying to park. My face got red and I started sweating. So when we're giving more detail about just two events, it's way more exciting than if we just list things in a row. It paints that picture and gives you more information. So this is what you are going to do right now, Super Scholars. You are going to draft the middle of your personal narrative using, of course, your story plan and the draft of the beginning, because you're just going to continue writing on the same piece of paper, because this is one story, so you need to write all the parts together. So just like we did up here, you're going to skip a line right after your beginning to start drafting your middle. And you're using the two events that you wrote on your outline. Just the two, but you're giving more information with them. You're adding to it, just like I did. I was talking about more about what I saw and how I felt. And that's exactly what I need you to do today. Like I said on Monday, I wasn't with you in these stories, so I want you to give me as much information as possible about what you saw, how you felt, what you heard, and what you smelled. Take your time, and it's okay if you get stuck. You can take a little break and come back and finish writing. But I want you to try and give as much information as you remember. That will make your writing the most exciting. Okay, second grade, I loved reading the beginning of your drafts, so I can't wait to see what more happens in your story in the middle. So let's go use that description and add those adjectives and start writing.